My childhood was a boardroom. Every dinner felt like a meeting, wrapped in silver and fear. Raymond sat at the head of the table, his glass always half full of power. He didn't ask about school. He asked about efficiency. My mother smiled beside him, polished and silent. Celeste loved her image more than the truth. She spoke of family like it was a brand. She dressed loyalty in pearls and silence. I learned early that love had conditions. Every compliment came with a price tag. Be brilliant, but agreeable. Be visible, but harmless. I obeyed like a well-coded system. Raymond liked control. He believed emotion was a weakness to be trimmed. When I disagreed, he called it immaturity. When I complied, he called it potential. Every word was a transaction. Every gesture was an investment in obedience. Celeste called it upbringing. I called it programming. She filled our house with mirrors and speeches. She hosted charity galas that smelled like champagne and false virtue. Her friends adored her. They called her generous. They never saw the fear in her daughter's eyes. They never noticed the quiet corrections behind closed doors. Helios Capital was his empire. Our home was its annex. He ran both with the same tone, precise, cold, absolute. When I turned 16, he gave me a gift. It was a ledger. Track your value, he said. Not your feelings. Your results. I smiled. I learned to measure everything: approval, silence, pain. I built charts in my mind, graphs of survival. The axis was control. The curve was obedience. At university, I studied numbers because they never lied. They gave me clarity when people didn't. When I returned home with a doctorate, Raymond hired me. He introduced me at the board, meeting as a strategic addition. Not daughter. Not family. Just a line item on his annual report. The men in gray suits nodded. I nodded too. That was the moment I understood the equation. He saw people as assets. He saw me as his perfect product. Celeste clapped from the back row, glowing with pride and denial. I stood there, smiling, memorizing every face, every phrase. I began to collect data. Emails. Directives. Patterns. Every insult disguised as advice. Every threat hidden in professionalism. I saved it all. I wasn't emotional. I was meticulous. My survival became an algorithm. The world thought I was the quiet genius. They didn't know I was writing code for an ending. Raymond taught me control. Celeste taught me appearances. Together, they built a cage made of etiquette and ambition. And while they rehearsed perfection, I studied escape velocity. Every smile I gave them was another calculation. Every silence was storage space for truth. I wasn't waiting to be saved. I was preparing to execute. Rebellion never came as fire. It came as math. I built my revenge in spreadsheets. Every formula was a weapon disguised as logic. At Helios, I designed Orion, the system that breathed for the company. It managed billions with precision, faster than any trader could blink. Raymond loved it because it obeyed. He called it perfect. He called me efficient. He never asked what it could really do. That was his first mistake. In the licensing contract, I wrote a clause. Clause 17B. Hidden in the labyrinth of compliance language. It sounded harmless, almost dull. System integrity protocols in case of executive misconduct. No one read past the heading. No one ever does. But I knew what it meant. If any executive violated ethics rules, Orion would react. Not with alarms. With silence. It would freeze every account, every transaction, every heartbeat of Helios. I built the company's brain to protect itself from corruption. And I left the trigger buried in the code. They trusted me because I looked harmless. A quiet analyst with calm eyes and steady hands. They never noticed the calculation behind my smile. At night, I tested the system in secret. Simulations, stress protocols, false scenarios of fraud and manipulation. Each time, Orion obeyed perfectly. Each time, the system killed the disease. I called it a firewall for greed. Raymond would call it betrayal. But to me, it was justice in binary form. Celeste would never understand. She saw loyalty as currency. I saw it as liability. I began to map their habits like variables. The late-night transfers. The offshore accounts. The way she funneled donations through fake charities. The way he justified every manipulation as strategy. I watched patterns form like constellations of deceit. I didn't act yet. Patience was part of the equation. The longer I waited, the cleaner the proof became. Every lie has a timestamp. Every crime leaves metadata. They just didn't know I was archiving them all. In meetings, Raymond lectured about risk management. He looked at me when he said, "Predict the storm before it comes." I wanted to laugh. I already had. He believed control meant safety. But control only hides the cracks until they collapse. I learned to stay invisible, to blend in with the machinery. I wore silence like armor. Every click of my keyboard was a prayer for collapse. I didn't want noise. I wanted precision. Revenge wasn't emotional anymore. It was structural. It lived in algorithms, not anger. It breathed through the same wires that carried his power. When the day came, I wouldn't need to raise my voice. The system would do it for me. A quiet revolution written in code. A daughter turned into a trigger. A family built on lies ready to implode. And all it would take was one verified breach. One click. One truth. He summoned me to his study just before midnight. The rooms smelled of old leather and a cheaper brand of whiskey than he pretended to favor. He slid a tablet across the desk with a casual violence that made the screen tremble. On it were transfer codes and routing sheets that had already been flagged by Orion in simulation. "Sign this," he said, like an instruction rather than a request. His voice was low and practiced, the voice that demanded compliance from markets and people. I scanned the codes and the shell entities and felt the algorithm in my chest tighten. "They don't meet compliance thresholds," I said, calm as a ledger entry. He set his jaw and leaned in, close enough that the heat of his breath fogged the glass. "You built the system," he hissed. "Make it do what it's told." When I refused, his hand closed around my wrist with a force that tried to translate ownership into pain. It was a percussive pressure, meant to remind me of my place. I did not cry out because noise would be evidence of flinching, not of injury. I photographed the bruise later, under bedside light with methodical care. 3 angles, high resolution, time-stamped and encrypted. I uploaded the images to a triple encrypted cloud folder labeled contingency. Then I deleted every trace from my device and from the temporary caches my browser kept. This was not a moment for the police or for sympathy. This was a data point in a longer equation. At my desk, I opened the internal whistleblower portal and drafted an incident report with surgical language. I framed the narrative around fiduciary duty and unauthorized capital movement, not trauma. I attached the transfer batch numbers and server logs, but not the photographs of my wrist. The physical assault was relevant only as proof of coercion, not as the headline. Next, I accessed a secure legal services channel I had prepared months earlier. I executed a biometric authenticated transfer of intellectual property ownership for Orion. The assignee was the Aurora Trust, a charitable vehicle I had registered under strict governance. The trust charter named a representative of the employee pension fund as co-trustee. It explicitly barred anyone named Voss from holding any fiduciary or beneficiary role. With one signed document, The control of the system moved off the corporate balance sheet. I watched the digital ledger confirm signatures and biometric hashes. The transfer was instantaneous and legally binding under the state registry. Then I prepared a sealed data room and populated it with curated evidence packets. Each file contained layered steganographic markers I had developed, micro-noise patterns as fingerprints. Any unauthorized export would convert the invisible noise into a visible QR-style tag. The tag would reveal the device IP, and unique access key used at the time of capture. I created 2 distinct access portals to the room and seeded them deliberately. One link went to the private account I knew Raymond used for convenience. The other went to Celeste's personal email, phrased in the performative language she favored. I watched activity logs like a clinician watches a monitor, waiting for fluctuation. At 8:21 a.m., a device authenticated and exported the trust agreement. The checksum matched the variant tied to his hardware. I triggered a scheduled anonymous dispatch to a financial reporter with the exported file attached. I also sent a secure file to the chair of the ethics committee with highlighted clauses. Everything moved according to sequence. I had built the mechanism so the institution would pull the cord for me. I did not revel in the wound. I treated it as the final input to a system that would correct itself. At 7:05 a.m., the alert appeared on my secure terminal. A single green line of text blinked across the screen. Protocol fog armed and awaiting executive verification. I stared at it the way a surgeon studies a heartbeat before the incision. No emotion, only precision. The system had cross-verified 3 independent data points: the Treasury logs, my formal report, and a compliance algorithm that flagged the same transfer overnight. Triangulation complete. No human hand was needed anymore. The code would move forward like gravity. By 9:12 a.m., the Ethics Committee's database registered confirmation. Incident EC 734. Status verified, threshold met. The words felt colder than any bruise. I didn't press a button. I simply watched the cursor blink like a pulse counting down. At exactly 9:18 a.m., Orion executed the clause. A red banner unfolded across the monitor in silent authority. Fog mode engaged, all allocations suspended. Instantly, billions in automated trades and liquidity streams froze mid-flow. Helios stopped breathing. No alarms, no collapse, just an absence of motion. The company that measured time in microseconds had entered stillness. Server nodes from London to Singapore echoed the same command. I could almost feel the vacuum spreading through the network lines. The empire was pausing itself. At 9:22 a.m., Orion dispatched automated notifications. Board members, auditors, and external regulators received the same sterile message. Potential executive ethics breach detected. Emergency session scheduled. Phones across Ravenport vibrated like insects caught under glass. Raymond would see it too. Celeste would pretend she didn't. At 9:27 a.m., the secondary lock engaged. Every account linked to Golden Horizon League, and its subsidiaries froze solid. Vendor payments, trusts, offshore loops, all halted mid-transaction. The machine was protecting itself from its creators. I had predicted this timing months in advance. David, the legal counsel, called me at 9:31 a.m., voice cracking with tension. "Is Clause 17B actually enforceable?" he asked. I told him to reread his contracts carefully and hung up. The market feeds around me turned gray, flickering between halted indices. News crawlers began to speculate before the hour turned. At 9:33 a.m., the first article hit the networks. Helios Capital under scrutiny for potential fund misuse. The leaked file was attached, complete with the digital watermark from Raymond's own export. It was beautiful in its symmetry. evidence signed by the guilty. The cage now had walls made of data and public opinion. My phone buzzed again and again. Mother. Each call went to voicemail. She wasn't calling out of love, only panic. I silenced the device and turned toward the window. The city outside looked unaware, ordinary. But inside Helios, circuits were locking like muscles after death. At 9:48 a.m., I sent one last email. It contained the full licensing document of Orion with the highlighted clause. Subject, for reference ahead of 10:00. The chair of the board would read it soon enough. They would find the only escape path hidden inside. The system wasn't punishing anyone. It was performing the task it was designed to do. Balance the equation. Remove the infection. Restore integrity by erasing its source. I didn't need to fight anymore. The algorithm was speaking for me now. Its language was silence, and the city was about to hear it. The boardroom felt colder than usual. At 10:00 a.m., the meeting began without ceremony. 12 directors, 1 predator, and 1 witness disguised as me. I sat at the far end, calm as a metronome. Raymond entered late, face pale, smile brittle as glass. The chairman's voice cut through the static of nervous whispers. Fog mode has been triggered. Ms. Voss, explain its function. I met his eyes without hesitation. I didn't trigger it, I said. The system did, automatically, as written and approved by this board. A ripple moved through the room, disbelief wrapped in fear. I tapped my tablet, and the main screen came alive with diagrams. Blue arrows. Boxes labeled Treasury, Golden Horizon, Beneficiary League. And beneath them, a signature, Celeste Voss. The silence was sharp enough to cut. Raymond slammed his palm against the table. His anger sounded like panic disguised as authority. My wife's foundation is legitimate, he shouted. You are twisting goodwill into conspiracy. I didn't respond. I changed the slide. On one side, the leaked file from the news feed. On the other, the digital log from Orion. Device ID. Timestamp. Checksum. The data lined up like a firing squad. The export originated from your workstation, I said softly. Every head turned toward him. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The counsel adjusted his glasses, trembling. The chairman asked the only question that mattered. Does this meet the criteria for an ethics breach? The counsel swallowed hard. Yes, it does. The words landed like a verdict. A woman near the center of the table leaned forward. Elara, the independent director, known for her precision. What happens now? She asked. The system remains locked, I replied. Until the board takes corrective action. Raymond's mask cracked. He looked almost human then. Turn it back on, he demanded. I can't, I said. Ownership of Orion was transferred last night to Aurora Trust. He blinked, lost in the unfamiliar taste of powerlessness. I advanced the slide again. The trust charter appeared, highlighted in gold. All profits from Orion now fund Helios employees' pensions. The Voss family is excluded from any benefit or control. The chairman exhaled slowly, reading every line twice. A murmur spread, shock mixed with a strange kind of admiration. Raymond tried to stand, but his knees betrayed him. His empire was crumbling in real time, one clause at a time. Then the doors opened. Celeste entered, perfect posture trembling underneath. She called it a misunderstanding, a philanthropic misread. I slid one final document across the table. The grant ledger of Golden Horizon. Single beneficiary, the Ravenport Circle. Private, exclusive, chaired by Celeste Voss. The directors read it in sequence, each slower than the last. The performance was over. Celeste's voice cracked. You're destroying us. I met her eyes without blinking. No, I said. I'm freeing the company from you. Elara turned to the council again. Under Article 7, Section B, she said, their voting rights are suspended pending audit. The motion passed without resistance. Raymond lowered his head. Celeste stared at nothing. I folded my hands. The silence afterward was perfect. The machine had finished its work. Justice delivered in binary precision. The vote was swift. No speeches, no hesitation, just signatures sealing and ending. Raymond's name was struck from the ledger of power. Celeste's privileges were revoked with the same ink she once worshipped. The board turned to me, not as an enemy, but as the quiet architect of survival. Elara's voice filled the air like a gavel. Effective immediately, both are suspended pending full investigation. I nodded once. No satisfaction, only confirmation of math. The numbers balanced now. Raymond sat motionless, the color drained from his face. He tried to speak, but only air left his throat. Celeste reached for his arm, but he didn't move. Her nails trembled against the table. The empire they built on manipulation had become an empty shell. The chairman cleared his throat and asked, "What happens to Orion now?" "It runs as written," I said. "The trust ensures the system serves the employees, not the family." He nodded, understanding that I had rewritten the company's DNA. Orion would no longer obey greed. It would obey structure. Raymond's reflection stared at me across the polished table. The man who once measured me in profit margins looked smaller than the chair he occupied. "You think this makes you righteous," he whispered. "No," I replied. "It makes me correct." The board dispersed, voices low, footsteps heavy with disbelief. I stayed behind for a moment. The digital clock on the wall blinked 10:47. The minute everything changed. I gathered my files and the folded document I'd carried in my blazer. It was the declaration I'd written the night before. The renunciation of every claim to their fortune. I placed it on the center of the table, beside the empty chair of the chairman. A quiet signature of departure. Outside the boardroom, the hall was lined with screens flashing headlines. Helios board confirms leadership suspension. The market was already reacting, but not collapsing. Orion's safety nets were doing their work. The employees' pensions were secure. The chaos was contained to the top floor only. I walked past the assistants who avoided my gaze. They didn't know whether to fear me or thank me. Both were accurate. My phone buzzed once more. Celeste's name glowed against the glass. I let it fade to silence. She would want to negotiate, to spin a narrative. But this story was already finished. Downstairs, the city was waking to the sound of its own heartbeat again. Traders, screens, motion. The machine had resumed without its masters. I stepped outside into the gray light. The air was sharp, honest. For the first time in years, I could breathe without calculating. I thought of the ledger I once kept as a child. Every entry of pain, every loss, every silence. The final total was 0. No debt, no balance due. Justice had reconciled itself. Behind me, the tower glimmered like a hollow monument. Ahead, the street hummed with life. I didn't look back. I had already deleted their names from the code. And from my memory. The city moved again, unaware of what had broken above it. Helios stood silent, a monument to its own correction. I walked through the morning crowd like a ghost who had fulfilled her function. No one looked twice. No one knew the empire had died quietly before sunrise. The news feeds called it an audit. I called it equilibrium. Raymond and Celeste would spend months untangling what was left of their illusion. Their world had been built on confidence, not truth. And confidence is the easiest currency to erase. The employees would find their pensions secured, their futures intact. That was enough. I didn't crave victory or vengeance. Those were luxuries for people who still needed recognition. I wanted silence, clean and final. The kind that follows completion. At the corner, a gust of wind lifted the paper from my pocket. My resignation letter drifted into the gray air. I didn't chase it. Let it go, I thought. Some systems correct themselves only when released. I looked once at the tower's reflection and then turned away. Balance restored. Equation solved. End of line.